You saw that number on the thumbnail and something in your gut moved. 3. 3 cancers. Not a typo. Not an exaggeration. 3 separate cancers, in 3 different parts of one man's body, across one devastating decade of his life. And if you are sitting there right now thinking that a story like this cannot possibly end with the man still alive, I need you to stay right where you are. Because he is alive. And the reason he is alive is going to change the way you think about your own body forever. Let me take you back to February 2006. A Tuesday morning. Cold, gray, unremarkable. The kind of morning that gives you absolutely no warning that your life is about to be cut in half. Alan Cooper was 51 years old. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, a laugh that arrived before he did. He ran a small contracting business in the Pacific Northwest. He coached his son's baseball team on weekends. He grilled on Sunday afternoons and argued about football and believed, the way most of us silently believe, that serious illness was something that happened to other families. Not his. Not yet.
Thank you.
Maybe not ever. But for 3 months something had been quietly wrong. He was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He had lost 11 pounds without trying. And there was this cough, dry, persistent, showing up every morning like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. He told himself it was the winter air. He told himself it was the stress of a big contract. He told himself a lot of things because the alternative, the thing he wasn't letting himself think, was too loud and too frightening to look at directly. When his wife finally sat across from him at the kitchen table one evening and said, "Alan, please just go," he went. He walked into that doctor's office expecting to walk out with a prescription and a pat on the back.
Thank you.
Instead, he was sent for a chest scan, then another,
Oh, God,
then a
thank
biopsy.
you.
And then 11 days passed, 11 of the longest, quietest, most terrifying days of his life, before a doctor sat across from him and folded his hands on the desk in that particular way that doctors do when the news is not good. Non-small cell lung cancer. Stage 2. Alan said the room went very still. Not silent. He could hear the hum of the building, the sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. But inside, everything went absolutely still. Like the world had inhaled and forgotten to breathe out. He drove home alone. He sat in the driveway for 22 minutes before he went inside to tell his wife. That moment in the driveway, that is where this story begins. Not in the hospital.
Thank you.
Not in the doctor's office. In a parked truck, in the gray February light, with a man trying to figure out how to walk through his own front door and say the words out loud for the first time. What happened next? The surgeries, the fear, the grueling climb back towards something that felt like living, that would have been enough. That story alone would have been enough. But Alan Cooper's story does not end with 1 cancer. It does not end with 2. And the third one is the one that should have killed him. The third one is also the one that may end up saving you. To understand what Alan Cooper survived, you first need to understand who he was before cancer tried to take him
Thank
apart.
you.
He grew up in a small logging town in Oregon,
Oh,
the second of
God,
4
thank
boys
you.
raised by a father who worked with his hands and a mother who believed that complaining about your health was a form of weakness. Nobody in that house talked about pain. Nobody went to the doctor unless something was visibly broken or bleeding. You pushed through. You got up. You got on with it. That was the culture he was raised inside, and it shaped him completely. By the time Alan was in his 30s, he had built a contracting business from nothing. Just him, a second-hand truck, and a reputation for showing up on time and doing the job right. By his 40s, he had 8 employees, a house he was proud of, and a marriage that had survived the particular pressure of building something from scratch together. His wife, Sandra, was a school librarian with a quiet stubbornness that matched his own. They had 2 kids, a son named Derek who played baseball like he was born to it, and a daughter named Melissa who was already in college studying nursing, which Alan always said was the one genuinely useful thing either of his children had decided to do with their lives. He said it as a joke, but he meant it as pride. He was not a man who sat still. Weekends meant projects, a deck to build, a fence to repair, something always in motion. He ate what he wanted, drank a beer or 2 on Friday nights, and exercised by accident the way working men do, through the physical demands of a life spent on job sites rather than in gyms.
Thank
He was
you.
not unhealthy, but he was not paying attention either.
Oh, God,
And that
thank
inattention,
you.
that deep, culturally reinforced habit of ignoring what the body was quietly trying to say, was the thing that almost cost him everything. Because the symptoms that eventually led to his diagnosis had been present for nearly 4 months before he acted on them. 4 months of a body sending signals and a mind finding reasons to dismiss them. The fatigue that he blamed on a heavy workload. The weight loss he attributed to skipping lunch on busy days. The cough that he genuinely convinced himself was seasonal. None of these things on their own felt like emergencies. Together, they were a warning system screaming into a room where nobody was listening. When the diagnosis finally came, non-small cell lung cancer, stage 2 right upper lobe, his doctors moved quickly. Surgery was scheduled within 3 weeks. They would remove the affected lobe, follow with a course of chemotherapy, and monitor aggressively. The prognosis, while serious, was not hopeless. Stage 2 lung cancer carries a 5-year survival rate of somewhere between 30 and 50% depending on the patient, the tumor biology, and the treatment response. Those are not comfortable odds. But they are not zero. Alan did not research the statistics. Sandra did, alone, late at night on her laptop after he had gone to sleep, and she made the decision not to share the numbers with him. She understood something important about her husband. He did not need to know the odds. He needed to believe there was a door in front of him, and that if he kept walking forward, he would eventually reach it. So that is what he did. He walked forward. One brutal, exhausting, nauseating step at a time. The surgery went well. The margins were clean. The chemotherapy was 6 rounds of punishment that left him 23 pounds lighter and unable to walk to the end of the driveway without stopping to rest. He lost his hair, his appetite, and for a while, though he would not say this out loud until years later, he lost his sense of himself. The man who filled a room without trying became a man who struggled to fill his own lungs with air. But he got through it. Scan by scan, month by month, he got through it. By late 2007, his oncologist used a word that Alan had been afraid to even think. Remission. The cancer was gone. The scans were clear. Alan Cooper had walked through the door. He stood in the hospital car park afterwards and called Sandra and said 2 words, "It's clear," and then neither of them said anything for a long time. They just stayed on the line together, breathing, while the word remission settled into the space between them like something holy. He was going to be fine. Except he wasn't. Not yet. Not even close. There is a particular kind of cruelty in what happened to Alan Cooper next. Not the cruelty of randomness, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something more specific than that. Something that felt, to Alan and Sandra and everyone who loved them, almost personal. He had done everything right. After remission, Alan became a different man in the best possible way. He quit smoking. He had been a light, occasional smoker for years, something he had never quite categorized as a real habit, but he stopped completely the week of his diagnosis and never went back. He started walking every morning, 30 minutes before work, in the gray Pacific Northwest light with a travel mug of coffee and a deliberateness that hadn't been there before. He went to every follow-up appointment. He got every scan. He ate better, rested more, and paid attention to his body in a way he simply had not bothered to do in the 50 years before cancer introduced him to his own mortality. For 2 years the scans stayed clean. His energy came back. The weight returned. Derek got married in the summer of 2008, and Alan danced at the wedding. Genuinely danced, badly, joyfully, the way a man dances when he is grateful to still be at the party. Sandra watched him from across the room with an expression that she later described as pure relief given a physical form. Life, improbably and beautifully, had returned to something that felt normal. And then, in the spring of 2009, Alan found a lump. It was on the left side of his neck, just below the jaw. Small, firm, painless. He noticed it one morning while shaving and stood very still in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, his hand pressed against the side of his throat, telling himself it was nothing. A swollen gland. An infection. The residual effects of a cold he couldn't quite remember having. He waited 2 weeks before telling Sandra. He waited 2 weeks because somewhere in the part of him that was still the boy raised not to complain, he had decided that if he didn't say it out loud, it might simply go away. It did not go away. When Sandra saw his face the morning he finally told her, she did not panic. She had been waiting for this conversation without knowing she was waiting for it. She simply said, "We're calling Dr. Reeves today." And they did. The biopsy came back 8 days later. Squamous cell carcinoma of the head and neck. A completely separate primary cancer. Not a metastasis of the original lung cancer. Not a spread. Not a continuation of the same disease. A brand new cancer. An entirely different disease, arising from entirely different cells, in an entirely different region of his body. His oncologist, Dr. Patricia Reeves, had been practicing for 22 years. She told Alan and Sandra later that when she saw the pathology report, she sat at her desk for a full minute before picking up the phone to call them. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she needed a moment to absorb the sheer statistical weight of what she was looking at. The odds of developing 2 completely unrelated primary cancers in the same individual within a 3-year window are extraordinarily rare. Estimates vary, but researchers placed the likelihood somewhere below 2% of the cancer population. Alan Cooper had just become a member of a club that nobody applies to join. Sandra held Alan's hand in that consultation room and felt something she had not expected to feel in that moment. Not just fear, though the fear was there, vast and cold and familiar. She felt something closer to fury. A hot, disbelieving rage at the sheer unfairness of it. This man had done everything right. He had survived, recovered, changed his life, shown up for every appointment, followed every instruction. And here they were again, in the same room, with the same terrible vocabulary. Alan, for his part, went very quiet. And then he said something that Dr. Reeves would remember for the rest of her career. He looked at the scan on the screen, looked at his wife and said, "All right, what do we do first?" No tears. No collapse. No bargaining with the ceiling. Just that question, delivered in the same flat, practical tone he used when a job site threw up an unexpected problem. What do we do first? The treatment was aggressive. Surgery to remove the affected lymph nodes, followed by concurrent chemotherapy and radiation. It was, by every account from everyone who witnessed it, the hardest thing Alan Cooper had ever endured. Harder than the first time because this time he knew exactly what was coming. He knew the nausea and the bone-deep exhaustion and the way the world narrows down to the distance between the bed and the bathroom. He knew all of it, and he walked straight toward it anyway. By early 2010 he was in remission again. 2 cancers, 2 survivals, 2 rounds of treatment that would have broken most people completely. Alan Cooper went back to work. He went back to his morning walks. He went back to his life and held onto it with both hands, the way a man holds something he knows he could lose. He should have been finished with hospitals for a very long time. He had earned that. He had paid whatever terrible price the universe seemed to be demanding of him. But the universe, it turned out, was not finished. To understand why Alan Cooper's body kept producing cancer, and more importantly, why it also kept surviving it, you need to understand something that most people are never taught about: how cancer actually works. We talk about cancer as though it is a single disease, a thing, an enemy with a fixed address that medicine can locate and destroy. But that is not what cancer is. Cancer is not one disease. It is more than 200 distinct diseases, each with its own biology, its own behavior, its own relationship with the body it arises in. And the version that attacked Alan's lung in 2006 had essentially nothing in common with the version that appeared in his neck in 2009, except for the fact that they both chose the same man. When a person develops 2 or more completely unrelated primary cancers, meaning cancers that did not spread from one another but arose independently in different tissues, the medical community calls this a multiple primary cancer diagnosis. And it is far rarer than most people realize. According to data from the National Cancer Institute SEER database, multiple primary cancers account for roughly 16% of all new cancer diagnoses in the United States. But the vast majority of those cases involve cancers that share a common cause. A smoker who develops both lung and bladder cancer, for example, or a person whose radiation treatment for one cancer increases their risk of developing another. Sequential, causally related cancers in adjacent or connected systems. What Alan had was different. His cancers were not linked by a shared cause. They were not related by tissue type or geography within the body. They arose in completely separate biological environments, driven by completely separate cellular malfunctions years apart. In the research literature, this is sometimes described as a synchronous or metachronous multiple primary, and the cases that involve 3 or more genuinely independent primaries are so rare that many oncologists will never encounter one in their entire career. So why does this happen? Why would one person's body generate cancer in 3 completely different locations across a single decade? The research points to several converging factors. The first is genetic. Certain inherited mutations, most notably in genes like TP53, BRCA1, BRCA2, and a handful of others in the DNA repair pathway, dramatically increase a person's susceptibility to developing multiple independent cancers over a lifetime. These are not the genes that cause a specific cancer. They are the genes that are supposed to prevent cancer by repairing damaged DNA before it becomes malignant. When these repair mechanisms are compromised, the body loses one of its most critical lines of defense against cellular mutation. Think of it like a factory where the quality control department has been undermanned for years. Eventually, defective products start making it off the line, not in one department but across the entire facility. The second factor is immune function. Your immune system is not just your defense against viruses and bacteria. It is also your primary surveillance system against cancer. Every single day, cells in your body mutate. Most of those mutations are caught and destroyed by specialized immune cells, natural killer cells and cytotoxic T lymphocytes, before they have the chance to develop into anything dangerous. A person with a well-functioning immune surveillance system eliminates hundreds of potentially cancerous cells every day without ever knowing it happened. But in people who develop multiple primary cancers, researchers have found consistent evidence of immune dysregulation, not a total collapse of immune function, but a subtle, chronic impairment in the body's ability to identify and eliminate rogue cells before they take hold. The immune system is still working. It is just not working at the level required to catch everything. And over a lifetime, the cells that slip through can accumulate. The third factor is something researchers call the field effect. The idea that in some individuals, the entire tissue environment of the body has been preconditioned toward malignancy by a combination of genetic vulnerability, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and environmental exposure. It is not that cancer spreads from one location to another. It is that the conditions that allow cancer to develop are present throughout the body simultaneously, like a field of dry grass waiting for a spark in multiple places at once. Alan Cooper, his doctors would eventually come to understand, had all three of these factors operating at once. A genetic profile that compromised his DNA repair capacity, an immune system that was functional but imperfect in its surveillance, and a biological environment that had been shaped by decades of low-level oxidative stress into something that was, in the most precise scientific sense of the word, fertile ground for cancer. But here is the part that makes his case genuinely remarkable, the part that made researchers lean forward in their chairs. All of those same factors that made him vulnerable to cancer also appeared to be driving something else entirely. Something in his biology that was not just surviving cancer. Something that seemed to be actively fighting back. And that something had a name. And understanding it might be the most important thing you learn from this video. There is something that the medical charts and the pathology reports and the survival statistics cannot capture. Something that exists in the spaces between the clinical language. And if you want to truly understand what Alan Cooper went through, not just medically but as a human being, you have to be willing to sit with him in the harder moments. The ones that don't make it into the research papers. The first time you fight cancer, there is a kind of adrenaline that carries you. A terrible, clarifying focus. The diagnosis is new, the enemy is defined, the mission is clear. You put your head down and you fight because the alternative is unthinkable and because everyone around you is holding their breath and pouring their love into you, and you simply cannot, let that love be wasted. The first fight is awful. But it has a shape. It has a beginning and a middle and a destination you are walking toward. The second time is different. The second time you know too much. You know what the nausea feels like at 3 in the morning when the room is spinning and there is nothing left in your stomach and you are gripping the edge of the bathroom sink trying to remember what normal felt like. You know what it is to have your identity slowly dissolved by treatment, to look in the mirror and not quite recognize the person looking back. You know what it does to the people who love you watching you go through it again. And you carry that knowledge into every single day of the second fight like a weight that the first fight never had. Alan told a journalist years later that the hardest part of the second diagnosis was not the fear of dying. He had made a kind of private peace with that fear during the first cancer and found that, while it never fully disappeared, it became something he could carry without being crushed by it. The hardest part of the second diagnosis was what it did to Sandra. She had spent 2 years exhaling after the first remission. 2 years slowly unclenching, returning to sleep that was actually restful, returning to conversations that were not secretly about cancer, returning to the ordinary texture of a shared life. And then the lump in Alan's neck dismantled all of that in a single morning. Alan watched it happen. He watched the light change in her eyes the day he told her, and he carried the guilt of that moment long after the cancer itself was gone. Their son Derek, newly married and living 3 hours away, drove down the weekend after the second diagnosis and spent the whole of Saturday on the back deck with his father, saying very little. They watched the garden together and drank coffee, and Derek kept finding small tasks to occupy his hands. Fixing a loose board on the steps, adjusting a hinge on the gate, because doing nothing felt unbearable and there was nothing useful to be said. Alan understood. He loved his son more in that silent afternoon than he had words for. Melissa, his daughter, the nursing student who had since qualified and was working in a hospital 40 minutes away, handled the second diagnosis the way nurses handle things. With competence and information and a controlled calm that Alan suspected was costing her considerably more than she let on. She arrived with a folder of printed research, questions for the oncologist, and a meal plan for the weeks of treatment ahead. She held herself together with both hands in front of her parents and cried in the car on the way home. Alan found out later. He never mentioned it to her. He didn't need to. What the Cooper family understood, in the way that families understand things that are never fully spoken, was that they were no longer shocked by cancer. They had passed through shock. What they were living inside now was something more chronic and more complicated, a sustained state of vigilance that never fully turned off. Every headache, every unusual fatigue, every mark on a scan that needed a second look. The body was no longer simply a body. It had become a site of ongoing negotiation with something that kept coming back. And through all of it, through 2 surgeries, through 12 rounds of chemotherapy spread across 2 diagnoses, through radiation that burned the left side of his neck and left him unable to swallow solid food for 6 weeks, Alan Cooper kept getting up in the morning. He kept doing his 30-minute walks, even on the days when 30 minutes became 10 and 10 became 5 and 5 became just standing in the cold air at the end of the driveway until his legs remembered what they were for. He kept showing up at Derek's house for Sunday dinners when he was well enough. He kept calling Melissa every Thursday evening. He kept being, in every way that mattered, present. Not because he was fearless. He was not fearless. He was terrified in a deep and quiet way almost constantly. But he had decided, consciously, deliberately, in the way that stubborn men from small Oregon logging towns decide things, that fear was allowed to live in him without being allowed to run him. He survived the second cancer. And then he waited. And then the third one came. The third diagnosis arrived in the winter of 2013. Alan was 58 years old. It had been 3 years since his second remission. 3 years of clean scans, morning walks, and the particular quality of gratitude that only people who have nearly lost everything can fully access. A gratitude so specific and so physical that it shows up in the way you hold a cup of coffee in the morning, in the way you listen when someone is talking to you, in the way ordinary Tuesday afternoons feel almost unbearably precious. He had started to believe cautiously that he was done. The third cancer announced itself not with a lump or a cough but with blood. He noticed it one morning and said nothing to Sandra for 4 days. 4 days of private terror, of bargaining with himself, of that familiar mental machinery working overtime to manufacture explanations that were not cancer. By the time he told her, she already knew something was wrong. After 28 years of marriage, she could read him the way she read a room, quietly, accurately, without needing to be told. The diagnosis was colorectal cancer. Stage 2, localized, caught early enough to be treated with surgery and a shorter course of chemotherapy than his previous rounds. In purely clinical terms, it was actually the most treatable of the 3 cancers he had faced. But it arrived carrying a weight that the first 2 had not carried, because this time, for the first time, Alan Cooper sat in the oncologist's chair and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel before. He felt tired. Not physically tired, though he was that too. Tired in a deeper place. The place where a person stores their reserves of fight. And for several weeks in the winter of 2013, Alan Cooper was quietly, privately unsure whether those reserves had anything left in them. He told Derek this one evening in March, sitting in Alan's truck in a car park outside a pharmacy. He said, "I don't know if I've got another one of these in me." Derek sat with that for a long moment. And then he said, "You don't have to know right now. You just have to get through today." Alan drove home, went to bed, and the next morning he got up and booked the pre-surgical consultation. That is the human side of the story. Now here is the scientific side, and this is the part that changes everything. While Alan was undergoing treatment for his third cancer, a young oncology researcher at a university medical center was reviewing a series of cases that shared a striking characteristic. Patients who had developed 3 or more independent primary cancers and survived all of them. It was a tiny cohort, fewer than 40 patients across a 12-year dataset. But within that group, a pattern emerged that the researcher, Dr. James Whitfield, described in his published paper as biologically counterintuitive. Every single long-term survivor in the cohort showed evidence of an unusually robust and adaptive immune response. Not a normal immune response. Not even a slightly above-average immune response. Something that Whitfield described as a hyperadaptive immune phenotype. A biological profile in which the immune system appeared to learn from each successive cancer encounter and mount a progressively stronger and more targeted response with each new diagnosis. In other words, the cancer was not simply being defeated by a strong immune system. The immune system was being trained by the cancer. Each battle was making it more capable than the last. Like a soldier who survives 3 wars and emerges from each one more skilled, more resilient, and more dangerous to the next enemy than they were before. Alan's blood work, reviewed retrospectively by Whitfield's team, fit the profile precisely. His natural killer cell activity, the branch of the immune system responsible for identifying and destroying malignant cells, was measurably higher after his second cancer than after his first, and measurably higher again after his third. His body was not just surviving, it was adapting. It was, in the most literal biological sense, learning how to fight. There was also a second finding. Alan carried a rare variant of a gene called CDKN2A, a tumor suppressor gene that, in its standard form, helps regulate cell division and prevent uncontrolled growth. The variant Alan carried was unusual. Rather than the standard suppressive function, his variant appeared to produce an enhanced apoptotic response, meaning that cells in his body that showed signs of malignant mutation were being flagged for self-destruction more aggressively than in the average person. The gene was essentially telling damaged cells to eliminate themselves before they could become dangerous. The cruel irony, the twist that made his doctors shake their heads slowly, was that this same genetic variant also appeared to reduce the efficiency of certain DNA repair mechanisms, which meant Alan's body was both more likely to develop cancerous mutations and more aggressive in destroying them once they appeared. He was, in the most precise biological sense, built for this fight. Not despite his genetics, because of them. His third cancer was successfully treated. By the summer of 2014, Alan Cooper was in remission for the third time. 3 cancers, 3 remissions. One immune system that had spent a decade becoming something extraordinary. Alan Cooper's story did not stay in the Pacific Northwest. It did not stay in the quiet of his driveway or the oncologist's consultation room or the research paper that Dr. Whitfield published in a specialist journal that most people will never read. It traveled. Slowly at first, through the corridors of academic medicine, and then more broadly, as the implications of what his case revealed began to sink in. Because Alan Cooper is not just a remarkable survival story. He is a biological signpost. And what he is pointing toward is a fundamental shift in how the medical community understands the relationship between the human immune system and cancer. A shift that has direct, personal, urgent implications for every person watching this video right now. Here is what his case contributed to in concrete terms. The concept of immune oncology, the idea that the immune system can be harnessed, trained, and amplified to fight cancer, is now one of the most rapidly advancing fields in all of medicine. Treatments called checkpoint inhibitors, which essentially release the brakes on the immune system and allow it to attack cancer cells more aggressively, have already produced survival results in late-stage cancer patients that were considered impossible just 15 years ago. Patients with stage 4 melanoma, a cancer that was once a near-certain death sentence within months, are now living for years, in some cases achieving complete remission, because of immunotherapy. Alan's case, and cases like his, provided early human evidence for the core biological mechanism that these treatments are built on. The immune system does not merely react to cancer. It responds to it. It adapts to it. And in certain individuals, under certain biological conditions, it can do something that no chemotherapy drug has ever been able to do. It can learn. This has implications that extend far beyond the treatment of people who already have cancer. Researchers studying the hyperadaptive immune phenotype that Alan's case exemplified are now investigating whether this biological profile can be identified in people before cancer develops. Whether screening tools can be developed that flag individuals with unusually strong immune surveillance capacity. Whether lifestyle interventions, specific nutritional strategies, sleep protocols, stress management techniques, targeted supplementation, can shift a person's immune profile toward greater adaptive capacity. In other words, whether what Alan Cooper had can be deliberately cultivated. The answer, according to the most current research, is a qualified but genuinely exciting yes. Studies published in the last decade have demonstrated that natural killer cell activity, one of the key markers of Alan's hyperadaptive immune profile, is significantly influenced by modifiable lifestyle factors. Chronic sleep deprivation suppresses NK cell function by up to 40%. High levels of psychological stress reduce immune surveillance capacity through the same cortisol pathways we discussed earlier. Vitamin D deficiency, extraordinarily common in adults over 50, particularly in northern latitudes, directly impairs T-cell activation and reduces the immune system's ability to identify malignant cells. Conversely, specific nutrients have been shown to measurably enhance immune surveillance function. Zinc supports the development and activation of T cells and NK cells. Selenium activates glutathione peroxidase, reducing the oxidative stress that creates the biological environment in which cancer thrives. Omega-3 fatty acids reduce chronic inflammation, the low-level, systemic inflammatory state that researchers now understand as one of the primary preconditions for malignant transformation. None of this is a cure. None of this is a guarantee. Alan Cooper's own doctors are careful to say that his survival cannot be reduced to a supplement protocol or a lifestyle program. His biology was unusual. his genetic profile was rare. And he also received excellent medical care at every stage of his diagnosis and treatment. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the full weight of modern oncology applied with precision and skill. But the research emerging from cases like his is pointing towards something important and actionable. The immune system is not a fixed asset. It is a dynamic, trainable, responsive system that is being shaped every day by the choices you make. What you eat, how you sleep, how you manage stress, what you put into and take out of your body. And the difference between a person whose immune system catches a malignant cell before it becomes a tumor and a person whose immune system misses it may be smaller and more within your influence than you have ever been told. Alan Cooper walked out of his third round of treatment and back into his life. He went back to the morning walks. He went to Derek's kids' baseball games. He sat on the back deck with Sandra on summer evenings and listened to the garden settle into quiet. He did not feel like a miracle. He felt, he said, like a very tired man who was extraordinarily glad to still be here. But what his body did, what it revealed about the human capacity for biological resilience, that was something medicine needed to pay attention to. And finally, it was. Here is why this story matters right now. Not in some abstract, future medicine, wait for the clinical trials way. Right now. Today. For you. Every 2 minutes, someone in the United States is diagnosed with cancer. Not every hour. Every 2 minutes. By the time you finish watching this video, dozens of people across the country will have sat in a consultation room and heard words that divided their life into before and after. Cancer is not a rare event. It is the second leading cause of death in the developed world, and the trajectory is not improving as fast as the headlines suggest. The lifetime risk of developing cancer for an American adult is now estimated at 1 in 2 for men and 1 in 3 for women. Those are not statistics about other people. Those are statistics about the people in your house. And yet the way most people think about cancer, and more importantly, the way most people behave in relation to cancer, has not kept pace with what the science is now telling us. Most people treat their immune system the way they treat their car. They ignore it completely until something goes wrong, and then they hand it to someone else to fix. They do not think about immune surveillance capacity. They do not think about natural killer cell activity or oxidative stress or the chronic inflammatory state that their lifestyle may be quietly sustaining. They wait. Just like Alan waited in the months before his first diagnosis, finding reasonable explanations for unreasonable signs, until the moment when waiting was no longer an option. What Alan's case and the research it contributed to is trying to tell you is this. The window between a normal cell and a cancerous one is not a wall. It is a gradient, a process, something that unfolds over time, shaped by biology and genetics and environment and choice. And somewhere along that gradient, in most cases, there are points of intervention. There are moments where a well-functioning immune system, properly supported, would have caught and destroyed what eventually became a tumor. You cannot control your genetics. Alan Cooper could not control the fact that he carried a variant that compromised his DNA repair mechanisms. That was written into him at the cellular level before he drew his first breath. But he also could not have known, in the years before his first diagnosis, that the lifestyle he was living, the chronic stress of building a business, the inadequate sleep, the nutritional gaps that a working man's diet creates, the oxidative load of decades without meaningful antioxidant support, was quietly suppressing the very immune surveillance capacity that would eventually have to save his life. 3 times. The research is now clear enough to act on. Chronic sleep deprivation of even 90 minutes below your optimal level measurably reduces the immune system's ability to surveil for malignant cells. Psychological stress sustained over months or years depletes the antioxidant reserves that protect your cells from the oxidative damage that precedes malignant transformation. A diet chronically low in zinc, selenium, vitamin D, and omega-3 fatty acids produces an immune environment that is consistently less capable of catching cancer before it catches you. These are not marginal, theoretical effects. These are measured, documented, replicated findings from some of the most rigorous research institutions in the world. And the inverse is equally documented. People who prioritize sleep quality, who actively manage psychological stress, who maintain optimal levels of the specific micronutrients that support immune function. These people have measurably better immune surveillance capacity. Their natural killer cells are more active. Their inflammatory markers are lower. Their bodies are, in biological terms, better prepared for the fight that statistics suggest is likely coming for most of us at some point. Alan Cooper did not know any of this when he was 51 years old, sitting in a doctor's waiting room with a cough he had been ignoring for 3 months. He learned it the hard way, through a decade of surgery and chemotherapy and the particular education that only serious illness provides. You do not have to learn it that way. The information exists. The research is there. The interventions are available, affordable, and in many cases as simple as what you eat, when you sleep, and how seriously you take the signals your body sends before they become impossible to ignore. Alan's story is not just a survival story. It is a warning and an invitation delivered simultaneously. The warning is that your biology is not passive. It is being shaped right now, today, by every choice you are making or failing to make. The invitation is that the shaping is not finished. It is never finished, until it is. Not everyone in the medical community tells Alan Cooper's story the way we have told it here. And in the interest of giving you the complete picture, which is the only kind of picture worth giving, you need to hear the other side. There are oncologists, immunologists, and cancer researchers who look at cases like Alan's and reach for a much simpler explanation than hyperadaptive immune phenotypes or enhanced apoptotic response. They reach for the word that medicine has always kept in its back pocket for cases that resist clean explanation. They reach for luck. The argument goes like this. Cancer, in all its forms, is fundamentally a statistical phenomenon. Cells divide billions of times over a lifetime. Each division carries a small probability of error. Given enough time, enough divisions, and enough environmental pressure, errors will accumulate. In most people, most errors are caught and corrected. In some people, they are not. And in a very small number of people, multiple independent errors and multiple independent tissue systems go on to become multiple independent cancers. The fact that some of those people survive all of them does not necessarily indicate a superior biological mechanism. It may simply indicate that they were fortunate enough to have their cancers caught at treatable stages, to respond well to available treatments, and to avoid the complications that kill the patients who do not survive. Survival, in this reading, is not a biological signal. It is a statistical outcome. This is not a fringe position. It is held by serious, careful scientists who are rightly cautious about overinterpreting small cohort studies and retrospective data analysis. Dr. Whitfield's research, compelling as it is, involved fewer than 40 patients across a 12-year period. That is not a large enough sample to draw conclusions that can be confidently generalized to the broader population. The field of immuno-oncology is young, rapidly evolving, and still working through the enormous complexity of distinguishing genuine biological mechanisms from the noise of individual variation. There is also a legitimate concern about what researchers call survivorship bias. When we study people who survived multiple cancers, we are by definition not studying the people who did not survive them. We cannot know how many individuals had a similar genetic profile to Alan Cooper, the same CDKN2A variant, the same immune dysregulation, the same multiple independent primaries, and did not make it through. We cannot know whether the biological features that appear to explain Alan's survival are genuinely predictive or whether we are, in hindsight, constructing a narrative around an outcome and calling it a mechanism. These are fair points. They deserve to be heard. There is also meaningful debate within the scientific community about the degree to which lifestyle interventions can meaningfully shift cancer risk at the individual level. The population-level data is robust. We know that certain lifestyle factors correlate strongly with cancer incidence across large groups of people. But the translation from population statistics to individual risk modification is more complicated than the wellness industry typically acknowledges. A person who optimizes their sleep, manages their stress, and maintains ideal micronutrient levels is not immune to cancer. They are, on average, at somewhat lower risk than a person who does none of those things. But the individual variance is enormous, and the research does not support the kind of confident, direct-line claims that often appear in health content online. Alan Cooper's own doctors are careful about this. Dr. Reeves, who treated him through the second diagnosis, said in an interview that she believes strongly in the value of lifestyle medicine and immune support, but that she is wary of implying to patients that survival outcomes are primarily determined by how well they take care of themselves. That framing, she argues, risks placing guilt on patients who do not survive, as though they fail to be healthy enough, resilient enough, disciplined enough. Some people do everything right and still lose. That truth exists alongside Alan's story and must not be obscured by it. What the science supports, carefully and honestly stated, is this. The immune system is influenceable. Lifestyle factors measurably affect immune function. Optimal micronutrient status, sleep quality, and stress management create biological conditions that are more conducive to immune surveillance and less conducive to the inflammatory environment in which cancer develops. These are real effects documented in real research. They are not magic. They are not guarantees. But they are real and they are within your reach, and ignoring them is not a neutral choice. Alan Cooper's survival may be partly explained by biology. It may be partly explained by the quality of his medical care. It may be partly explained by factors that researchers have not yet identified. And yes, it may be partly explained by the cold, indifferent arithmetic of probability, which sometimes, against all expectation, falls in a person's favor. What it cannot be entirely explained by is luck alone, because luck does not produce a pattern. And Alan Cooper's immune profile is a pattern, one that medicine is only beginning to fully read. Alan Cooper is 69 years old today. He still lives in the Pacific Northwest in the same house he and Sandra bought 30 years ago, the one with the back deck he has rebuilt twice with his own hands, and the garden that Sandra tends from April through October with the kind of devotion that people who have been close to loss bring to living things. He still walks every morning. 30 minutes, same route, same travel mug of coffee in all weather. He says the walks are no longer about health, exactly. They are about something harder to name, a daily act of acknowledgement. A way of saying, quietly and without drama, that he is still here and that still being here is not something he intends to take for granted. He has been cancer-free for over a decade. He does not describe himself as cured, because his doctors have counseled him against the confidence that word implies. He describes himself as clear, which is a different thing. Clear means the scans show nothing today. Clear means the body is doing what it is supposed to be doing, right now, in this moment. It does not make promises about tomorrow. Alan has made his peace with that. More than peace, he has come to see it as the only honest way to live for anyone regardless of their medical history. He talks about cancer now in a way he never could in the middle of it, with a kind of measured openness that his daughter Melissa says took years to develop and that she thinks is one of the most valuable things he has to offer the people around him. Not inspiration in the polished, motivational poster sense. Alan has no patience for that version of his story, but something more useful. The specific, earned knowledge of a man who has been very afraid and kept going anyway, and who understands from the inside what it actually takes to do that. What does it take? He was asked this in an interview 3 years ago. He thought about it for a long time. And then he said this. He said that the thing that kept him going was not courage. He disputes that characterization of himself with genuine irritation. And it was not faith, though he has a quiet, private version of that too. The thing that kept him going, he said, was specificity. The ability to narrow his focus, in the hardest moments, to the smallest possible actionable thing. Not, survive cancer. That is too large. That is an ocean. You cannot swim an ocean, but you can swim to the next buoy. And then the next one. And if you keep doing that, eventually you look up and the shore is closer than you thought. What this story leaves you with, if you let it, is not just the remarkable biology of one man's survival. It is a set of questions worth sitting with. Questions about your own body and what you are doing, right now, to support the immune system that is working on your behalf every single day without asking for your attention or your gratitude. Questions about the signals you might be explaining away with reasonable-sounding excuses. Questions about the gap between knowing what supports your health and actually doing it, consistently, seriously, as though it matters. Because it does matter. The research is clear enough. The evidence from cases like Alan's is pointing in a direction that is hard to ignore if you are paying attention. You have a body that wants to protect you. It has mechanisms, complex, adaptive, astonishing mechanisms, that evolved over millions of years specifically to find and destroy the cellular errors that become cancer. Those mechanisms are not invincible. They can be suppressed by stress, by nutritional deficiency, by chronic inflammation, by the accumulated weight of a lifestyle that treats health as a background condition rather than an active practice. But they can also be supported, strengthened, given the resources they need to do the job they were designed to do. Alan Cooper's immune system learned to fight 3 cancers. It adapted, upgraded, and came back stronger each time. That is an extraordinary thing. But the researchers who studied his case will tell you that the distance between his biology and yours may be smaller than you think, and that the direction of travel is, at least in part, up to you. Sandra is still the first person Alan calls with good news. When the scan results come back clear, every 6 months, then every year, then as needed, he calls her before anyone else. Every single time she picks up on the first ring. Every single time she already knows from the sound of his voice before he says a word. He still grills on Sunday afternoons. He still argues about football. He still fills a room without trying, though the way he does it has changed. Quieter now, more deliberate, the presence of a man who knows what rooms feel like when you are no longer in them and has decided to be fully in this one for as long as he possibly can. 3 cancers tried to take Alan Cooper out of the room. 3 times his body said no. Pay attention to your body. Support it. Listen to it before it has to start screaming. Because the story it is trying to tell you, The one written in your cells and your immune cells and the quiet biological machinery running beneath every ordinary Tuesday morning of your life. That story is still being written. Make sure you are the one holding the pen. If this video gave you something to think about, something to act on, or something to share with someone you love, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We release new health stories every single day, and every single one of them is made for people who believe that understanding your body is one of the most powerful things you can do with your time. We will see you in the next one.